Deixeu-me introduir, i amb gran honor, el senyor Michael Green. És un eminent economista, escriptor i cofundador de l'Índex de Progrés Social, que s'ha convertit en una eina reconeguda per mesurar el benestar de la societat en funció de la satisfacció de les necessitats dels ciutadans. Molt més ben dit això que el que acabo de dir fa una estona, però ve a dir el mateix. El senyor Green és un pensador influent, professor universitari que ha estat alt funcionari del desenvolupament internacional del govern britànic. Tenim la sort de tenir-lo aquí per primera vegada a Catalunya, dedicant-nos una xerrada en exclusiva per al sector turístic, com he dit abans. Confio que la seva habilitat per comunicar idees innovadores ens ajudi a obrir camí a les nostres reflexions. Us deixo amb tots vosaltres Mr. Michael Green.
Thank you so much, and it's an absolute delight to be here. I have to tell you that I have spent my whole life thinking about tourism in Catalonia. Honestly, I have. My whole life I've been thinking about tourism in Catalonia. Because you see, before I was born, before she met my father, my mother travelled from England to Catalonia and worked in the tourism industry. So I grew up with stories of her having adventures in Palamos. Anyone here from Palamos? Yeah? All my life. So all my life I've been hearing about tourism in Palamos. So when I was invited, how could I refuse to come and join you here today? Now, I want to begin by taking you a bit further back in time. I want to take you back 90 years to the 4th of January, 1934. And this young man presents a report to the United States Congress. And this young man, Simon Kuznets, he's not a politician, he's not a business leader, he's an economist. And he's presenting this new report, National Income 1929 to 1932. Now, this report looks rather boring. This report is very boring. I've read it. Yeah? But this report is the foundation of the system of national accounting, what we know best as gross domestic product, GDP, that is the foundation of our modern global economy. This is where it begins. GDP, economic growth, didn't come down from God on tablets of stone. It was created 90 years ago as a practical tool. Kuznets' report was created at the time when the United States was going through the Great Depression. And as the US government was trying to deal with this economic crisis, they didn't have the data about what was going on in the American economy. What Kuznets' numbers, what the GDP numbers gave them, was information on what was really happening to help them manage that crisis and eventually recover. GDP proved it was useful, and then every country in the world now has started adopting it and has started using it. And it's become almost the drumbeat of our world. Governments rise and fall depending on how well their economies are growing. Companies boom and bust depending on the state of GDP and the economy. Lives are transformed by the movements in GDP. So the world is dominated by GDP. Do you think Simon Kuznets would have been proud? Well, actually, no. Very soon after he released his report, in this report itself, he issued a warning. He said, this data is there to help us manage our economies. It's not to measure the well-being of our societies. But we didn't listen to him. And actually, a bit like Dr. Frankenstein, Professor Kuznets spent most of his life fighting with his creation, trying to stop it being used and dominating our world. So GDP is a tool that was created to solve one problem, but is now being used in a different way. And we know there are problems with it. We know that GDP, economic growth, says nothing about our environment and about how our resources are being used. GDP says nothing about fairness or justice or equality. GDP counts bombs and prisons and earthquakes as progress. There's something wrong with this framing of how the world works. And that was why a group of us came together about 15 years ago after the global financial crisis and said, surely now is the time that we've got to do something to try and find a better way of measuring the progress of our societies. And we approached an expert, Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, to lead our work on this. We did that for a number of reasons. Number one, Michael Porter was and probably still is the leading business professor in the world. He is a red in tooth and claw capitalist. We didn't want this to be an anti-business agenda. And he also has a very strong track record of turning data into action. And when we invited Professor Porter to join us, he jumped at the opportunity. Because what he has seen in his work, working on competitiveness and strategy, is that yes, economic growth does improve lives, but not always. And he's also sure that long-term economic success is built on strong social foundations. And that was why we came together and collaborated and ultimately developed this tool called the Social Progress Index. And this is why I think what the strategy that you have developed for tourism in Catalonia is so important. Because I think what I want to show you now is what you're doing is exactly the right thing. If we focus only on economic success, we're only looking at half the picture. We've got to look at success not just economically, but in terms of people and planet in an integrated way. And I think the data I'm going to show you about the world, about Europe, about Spain, and about Catalonia will show you how looking through this lens of social progress actually is a way of understanding our world and setting priorities for our strategies and for collaboration between government and business. So let me show you the Social Progress Index. The basic idea is we're trying to say what is a good society. And a good society is, first of all, one that gives everyone the basic needs of survival. Essentially, food, water, shelter, safety. Secondly, a good society is one that gives everyone what we call the foundations of well-being. That's education, health, access to information, and a good quality environment. And thirdly, a good society is one that gives everyone opportunity, rights, freedoms, inclusion, and access to advanced knowledge. These 12 what we call components make up the Social Progress Index. And the key thing you'll notice here is there are no economic elements to this framework. Social Progress Index is not a replacement for GDP in economic measurement, it's a complement. It sits to work alongside. That's the idea behind the Social Progress Index. Now, we've developed this framework using the international literature about this. We've also anchored this within international agreements, the most important of which is, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 goals agreed by the UN. And I think this is important, is that there is actually a global consensus about the kind of inclusive, equitable societies that we're trying to build that's represented by the SDGs. So the Social Progress Index is a way of measuring progress against the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the framework. How do we measure? Well, what we do is we use already existing data. We carefully select from all the available data, from trusted sources, the best data that works together to measure these underlying concepts. So we're currently using 57 different indicators. And crucially, what we measure in the Social Progress Index is outcomes, not inputs. We don't want to measure how much money is spent on healthcare. We want to measure what are the health outcomes. We don't want to measure whether you pass laws about rights. We want to know whether people can exercise their rights. That's the principle. Okay, so that's the framework. We've been doing this for a number of years, and we've measured pretty much all the countries of the world. So let me start by telling you about how the world is doing. And I'm afraid it's not good news. What we've seen last year is that for the first time, the world has actually declined on social progress. So the global economy seems to be recovering, and there are very positive signals about GDP. But what we've seen is that we're in our first social progress recession. And what this means and breaks down to is that actually the vast majority of people in the world are living in a country where social progress is stagnating or declining. And with so many elections coming up this year around the world, I wonder what that's going to mean for politicians. Why is social progress declining around the world? Well, really, it's about three factors. The top line is where we measure access to information. Now, that's been improving steadily year on year until recently. What's happened in the last couple of years? Declining press freedom in many countries. So we've seen a decline in the quality of access to information. Secondly, we see the orange line is health. And this is really about the after effects of COVID. So COVID has had a shock effect on health systems. So life expectancies have been dropping in many countries, mortality rates rising, health systems under pressure. And then thirdly, the black line at the bottom is a long-term trend that we've seen a decline in rights around many, many countries in the world, rich and poor alike. So these three factors have come together, and they have caused the world for the first time to fall into a social progress recession. So that's the state of the world. Let's drill down now a bit more into some of the big regions. And first of all, let's have a look at the European Union against the United States. And this is actually very interesting, is that at the start of this period in 2011, social progress in the US was quite a lot higher than in the EU. Over this period, the OU has overtaken the US on social progress. And especially because I know that in Brussels there were lots of people worrying about the economic competitiveness of Europe compared to America. In terms of the social competitiveness, the social progress of Europe, Europe is doing very well. And perhaps that reflects something about what we're prioritizing in our choices. Because if you look at the US, it's actually quite a striking story. The US, its economy has done very well. There's a bump because of COVID. But despite the booming US economy, there's actually been a decline in social progress over the last 12, 13 years. So the US has got a real social progress problem that's been going on for a long time. So Europe has overtaken the US, partly because of what Europe's been doing right, but also partly because the US has been falling back. I want to widen the lens a bit more now and just have a quick look at the other G7 countries, some of the peers that you would be looking at compared to Spain. So the best G7 country is Germany, but as you see, Germany has been quite stagnant over this period. Similarly, Canada is the second best country. It's had some ups, had a bit of downs. The third ranked country is Japan, which has actually showed some quite steady improvement in social progress over these years. The fourth country is my country, the United Kingdom. And sadly, we, alongside Syria, Venezuela, and the United States, are one of only 4 countries that has declined in social progress since 2011. So that's not a great achievement for the United Kingdom. But we can always console ourselves by the simple fact that we are still beating the French. It's what matters. So France is next. France was so close, it could have overtaken us, but France's social progress has dipped. And then I think really interesting that is you see Italy's story. Italy has quietly and solidly been making a lot of progress over these years and has caught up and has overtaken the United States. So Italy was very much the last in the G7 at the beginning of this period and is now converged with many of the other countries. Yeah, that's very interesting. But how's Spain doing? Okay, I understand. So here's Spain. I don't know whether this surprises you or not. So Spain is very firmly in the group of those G7 countries. So it's very much a very similar level of social progress, with some quite interesting ups and downs over this period. So that's how Spain is doing compared to others. We can then have a look at a bit more detail into Spain's performance. And so we're looking at since 2011, what has happened to social progress in Spain. And so there's been a bit of progress overall. You see a 1.85 points improvement, but then some ups and downs. Nutrition and medical care, essentially no change. And that's not a bad thing. That's not surprising because you're so close to the maximum. Housing, bit of a deterioration in the score on housing, bit of an improvement on the score on water, but then a big improvement on safety. Some improvement in education, some improvement in information, health a little bit down. I suspect that's COVID related. Environmental quality is improved, rights are down, freedom's up, inclusiveness is down, and advanced education has seen a big improvement. So for every country, we can see how within that aggregate story, there's going to be various ups and downs. There's another way we can look at this data for Spain, is what we can do is we can plot social progress against GDP per capita. So on the vertical axis, higher is better, I've put social progress. And then on the horizontal axis, just for comparison, I've put GDP per capita. And this is all the countries of the world. And then what I've done is I've put the regression line through that shows the trend. And so the first thing to say here is, what this demonstrates is that economic growth is not a bad idea. I am not against economic growth. We can see, especially for poor countries, getting a bit more GDP can add a lot of social progress. And you can understand how. A bit more GDP means a few more nurses, teachers, roads, etc. So GDP does support higher social progress. But what we also see is that at any level of GDP, some countries are better than others at turning their economic resources into social progress. GDP is not destiny. Other choices matter as well. You can choose to make more inclusive or less inclusive choices in your policies. And just so you can see, here's Spain. So Spain is really part of a European peloton, you could say. They're generally pretty good at turning GDP into social progress. We can look at this in another way in more detail, is we can say, well, how does Spain's social progress compare to other countries of similar GDP per capita? So a bit like boxing, heavyweight against heavyweight, lightweight against lightweight. And I've got it here on this slightly scary scorecard, but don't worry, I'll talk you through it. So what we've done here is we've said, how is Spain performing on social progress against a set of 15 other countries of similar GDP per capita? And if Spain performs statistically significantly better than its peer group, it gets a blue light. In the world of social progress, traffic lights are red, yellow, and blue because it's better for people like me who are colorblind. So blue is good. If Spain is performing statistically significantly worse than its peer group, it's a red light, and then yellow in the middle. So what we see, first of all, overall at the top, is that Spain is performing okay, within the expected range. Actually, interesting, it's Spain's social progress rank, 25th, is higher than its GDP rank, but it's within an expected range. But when we break it down, we see there are some interesting areas of strength and weakness, and I thought it was worth highlighting these. So the first two areas of strength we see are nutrition and basic medical care. Now, I know that Catalonia is a home of the world's greatest gastronomy at the moment. We're not measuring gastronomy in this index. We're measuring things like undernourishment, child mortality, maternal mortality. And Spain's actually doing really well on this component, third in the world. Very strong performance. And actually for something like this, where there are lots of other rich countries, most of which will be doing well on this, to have a statistically significant better performance is actually a very big achievement. So that's one area where Spain's doing really well. The second one is actually on safety, and I think you saw that's an area where Spain has improved. No particular area indicator of strength, but overall, Spain is doing better than other countries of similar GDP on safety. So that's the good news. Where's Spain doing not so well? Well, it's two areas. The first one is on housing, and this is really about affordability of housing, which is a problem across many, many rich countries. But even amongst rich countries, Spain's problem seems to be a bit worse than others. The circle means it's statistically significant, but not a big difference in actual number. But there is a question there about housing affordability. Then the other one is on education, the school system. This is quite strikingly how, across a number of indicators, whether it's around gender equity or around school attainment, quality of education, Spain's indicators are weak. So there's a very clear weak signal here. Again, it's an area that I saw had improved, but is an area of weakness. So this is Spain's social progress scorecard for 2023. I just wanted to make a note is that in the Social Progress Index, we're very much looking at people and people's lived experience. So when we look at, for example, environmental quality, you'll see that in the middle and the bottom. We're looking at things like, recycling or particulate air pollution or lead exposure, things that directly impact people's life and health today. We're not looking at sustainability issues. But we can look at sustainability issues by combining social progress data with other sustainability data. So this is something we've done separately called the Just Transition Score. And simply what we've done is we've combined the Social Progress Index as the measure of social progress together with biodiversity data, greenhouse gas emissions, and also material footprint to give a sense of which countries are the best at having both economic growth that is inclusive and sustainable. So it's a combined measure of social progress and sustainability. And it's interesting that what the results we get when we add that sustainability factor in. So the best performing country in the world on the Just Transition Score is, in fact, Spain. That was rubbish. Spain, you're the best in the world. Okay, so that was absolutely terrible. So we're going to have to do this one again. Let's go back. Okay, so just so you know, when I say Spain, that is when you start clapping. Okay, we all clear? No hiding at the top. Okay, here we go. Blah 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 blah. And the best performing country in the world is Spain. And I didn't invent that just because I was coming here. And I've also discovered, traveling around the world, giving talks about this, is the worst thing to say to an audience is that their country or region is doing well. Whenever I tell people, oh, you're doing well, I get so much criticism. If I go to a country and say you suck, people love it. Yeah? Oh, yeah, we suck. But if you say you're doing well, people are always like, no, we're not doing well, we're terrible. Anyway. So let me say one thing very clearly. The fact that Spain has the highest Just Transition Score does not mean that it is sustainable. This is not an absolute measure. And indeed, Spain is still above planetary boundary limits for greenhouse gases, material consumption, etc. So sustainability is still a challenge, but compared to other countries, Spain is doing better. Greenhouse gas emissions are lower than other countries, especially the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, the ones you would normally who are top of the Social Progress Index, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland. Actually, when you look at their sustainability performance, especially material consumption, they do a lot worse. So Spain's got this balance of different inclusion and sustainability metrics that makes it the best in the world. You see some of the other countries are not so rich, so places like Costa Rica don't have very high GDP, but they have a high level of social progress and have very low environmental footprint. Just so you know, for reference, here's the rest of the G7 countries. I think quite strikingly, again, the US a long way down the bottom. Canada actually doing even worse at the beginning of this period. But Canada has made more meaningful progress over this period than others. And just to show you very quickly, in terms of Spain's progress, Spain's made progress both in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also in reducing material footprint. So it's made progress that way. Okay. So that's the Just Transition score where we can integrate social progress and sustainability data. What I want to do now is have a drill down into Catalonia. And we have been working for a number of years with the European Commission to produce a social progress index for the regions of the European Union. Now this, I'm sorry to say, is the latest edition, which is 2020. There is another edition coming out in May. I was hoping it would be ready before today, but the European Commission says no, May. So this is 2020 data. But what it does do is give us a breakdown of social progress across the regions of the EU. And perhaps, as we'd expect, we're seeing the Scandinavian, the Nordic countries doing very well. And then as we head south, the colours start to fade somewhat. But it's notable how Spain and Portugal are very much in that group heading towards France, rather than Italy's doing quite strikingly poorly. And then you've got some of the newer members, the Eastern Europe, Central European members, but again, quite a lot of texture there, where you've got Romania and Bulgaria very much at the back of the pack, and Greece alongside them. So Spain and Catalonia is doing reasonably well here. We can look at this across different angles. I just want to quickly show you how striking it is if you change the lens from aggregate social progress to look just at health. And on health, suddenly Spain, Catalonia really sort of becomes one of the leading regions. Spain as a whole much better than France. So when you look at different lenses, regions perform in different ways. So on health, Spain, Catalonia are doing well. Education, it's not the good story, what we've seen before. Education, again, below the level of other regions. So I want to drill in a little further into Catalonia's story. And look, I'm really sorry about this, but this graphic is horrible. It was made by the European Commission. I can't do anything else. So I have to use what they've given me, because we work with them, but they produce this EU Regional Social Progress Index. So it's quite horrible, but let me try and explain what it is telling us about Catalonia. The first of which, if you look in the top left-hand corner, it shows you the score on social progress and also where Catalonia ranks amongst the regions of the EU. And so we see that Catalonia's score on social progress is about the same as the EU average, and that Catalonia ranks 135th out of 240 regions. You go along to the right, and it tells you about GDP per capita. And that tells us, actually, so the EU average GDP is 100, so Catalonia's GDP is higher than the EU average, and its rank is 71 out of 240. I think that's worth noting. So when we looked at Spain's scorecard, so Spain's social progress rank was higher than its GDP rank. Whereas if we look at Catalonia within this EU regional SPI, its GDP rank is higher than its social progress rank. So there may be a question, is Catalonia better at creating GDP than generating social progress? Well, let's have a look, and let's see where we see strengths and weaknesses. Well, strengths, I think we understand, are areas we've seen before: nutrition and basic medical care, and health. In both these areas, Catalonia is performing well above the EU average, and the green light means it's performing better than its peer group of 15 European regions of similar GDP per capita. So these are the strong points for Catalonia. Areas of weakness? Well, actually we find four. One is water and sanitation. Now, I know that there's a water crisis going on at the moment, but what's actually being measured here is much more around water quality, and also, as I understand, sewage treatment is one of the issues. Pardon me. Shelter, again, it's affordability of housing. That's what's pulling the score down on shelter. Access to basic knowledge, again, it's the school system, it's education. And then one we haven't seen before as a weakness is personal freedom and choice. And this is really being driven about employment. It's young people not in education, employment in training, people in insecure jobs. those are the factors that are driving it. And if we're thinking about something that's got a direct connection to the tourism industry, work is a factor here in where Catalonia is underperforming. So these are the areas of weakness that we see from the EU Regional Social Progress Index data for Catalonia. And I was also asked to do a comparison with Tuscany. You could do this for any region you would like. So the blue line is the EU average, the red line is Catalonia, and the green line is Tuscany. And again, this sort of repeats what we've already seen before, is that where the big weakness for Catalonia is really around education. That's where it's behind the EU average, but also behind Tuscany. More broadly, Catalonia tends to overperform Tuscany in most areas, but education is the key area of weakness. I should have said all the data is available on our website, or this is on the European Commission website, to play around and have a look with that benchmarking comparison. And I think it's a way that you can use this data to understand not just where are the weaknesses of your region, but also to see who's doing better. And maybe there are lessons that can be learned about how to do things better. I want to conclude just to look at a very specific case study about the application of the Social Progress Index in the tourism sector. Oh, that's too kind. Thank you very much. Thank you. That is the other way. I mean, no, I don't. I look, what trust? I'll drink the water, despite what the Social Progress Index says. The Catalan hospitality my mother told me about. Thank you. So I want to just talk about an application of the Social Progress Index that was done in Costa Rica a few years ago. It's all falling apart. Thank you. So we've worked quite extensively with the government of Costa Rica on a number of areas through our partner, the INCAI Business School. And Costa Rican tourism ministry was very keen to look at how tourism could be most effective in delivering social progress within Costa Rica. So what our colleagues did was they developed a social progress index for all the different tourism destinations. So they looked specifically at tourism destinations in Costa Rica. And then for each of them, they looked at the social progress of those different destinations. And what they were able to show was how different types of tourism were more or less effective in delivering social progress for their communities. What they found, for example, was that where you just had a big hotel built near a beach, there was often very little positive engagement or interaction with the local community. Whereas where they were doing more agro-tourism, eco-tourism, there were ways that tourism could really sustain and nourish the local community in different ways. And so what they've done is that one is they've used this as a way of thinking about what kind of tourism they want to prioritize in Costa Rica. Tourism that delivers maximum social progress value for the population. But also as a way of thinking about, well, if this is the social progress of our destinations, how do we, the government, need to work with businesses to improve the lives of these communities? And I think they've found is that by creating a common language about the needs of communities, there's been a much more constructive discussion between the government and business about their respective responsibilities and obligations in supporting the communities where they operate. And so this is why the Social Progress Index, which can measure the social progress of the world or regions, can also measure the progress of individual communities, which can actually guide and inform and help governments and businesses to devise better strategies and to collaborate better together. Because ultimately that's what we're looking for. What we're saying is that looking at economic growth alone is only measuring half the story. If we complete the picture by looking at social progress and sustainability, we can then come up with balanced strategies that deliver for people and planet, which I think is very much at the core of the strategy you're thinking of for the tourism sector and Catalonia. And I just want to finish with one final thought from the former head of the World Tourism Organization. It is about creating 5-star communities. That's what we want. That is how we measure the success of any industry, any business, is does it create 5-star communities in terms of people and planet? Thank you very much.